Please note that this podcast contains information regarding sensitive events, including domestic violence, assault, and abuse, as well as other triggering events such as murder. This podcast is intended for mature audiences. When Alice jumped down the rabbit hole, she immediately regretted her decision. A rabbit hole is a metaphor for something that transports someone into a troubling, surreal state or situation. Welcome to Afterglow, Unveiling of the Idaho Cult. This is Season 1, Episode 11, The Idaho Cult Exposed. This podcast will take you down the deepest of rabbit holes as it unfolds. This story is so compelling, so bizarre, and so heinous, it's impossible to look the other way. Chad Daybell and Vallow were dedicated in the most horrible way to an ideology that should only be fiction. Instead, their ideology put them behind bars. Join us as we explore the lives, lies, and diabolical crimes of Vallow and Chad Daybell. I'm your host, Kathy Brooks. Please follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Hi, and welcome back. Welcome to Episode 11, Season 1, Episode 11, The Idaho Cult Exposed. If you haven't listened to Episodes 1 through 10, go back, stop now, go back and listen to all those, because all those build up to where we are now in this journey of this story of this horrible, dangerous set of people. I'm going to get into how this cult became a thing, where it is now, and why it's still going on, and the background of it, so everybody knows how Chad Daybell and Vallow tied into this whole entire thing, where we're calling them a cult, because there's a lot more people involved in this cult than Lori and Chad. Chad Guy Daybell was born August 11th, 1968 in Provo, Utah. He married Tamara Douglas, who was born May 4th, 1970. He graduated from Brigham Young University in 1992 with a Bachelor in Arts in Journalism, and he worked at some point during his marriage to Tammy as a cemetery sexton, which is also a gravedigger. In 2004, Chad founded the Spring Creek Book Company, and he used that to self-publish his End of Times fiction and other religious books. I was forwarded some information from a YouTube channel called Confetti Antiques and Books, where Chad Daybell, one time, over a decade ago, was interviewed, and he speaks a little bit about his experience as a cemetery sexton and his writing and his publishing company. Here's a few clips from that.
Welcome to Turning the Page. I'm host Donnie Morse of Confetti Antiques and Books. In today's program, we are very excited to have with us author Chad Daybell and a good friend of mine as well, Ryan Nelson, who has read Chad's books and has quite a bit to say about them. Chad, welcome to the program. Ryan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Chad, I know you have written many, many books. To get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started writing, where that all came from? What was your motivation originally to start writing?
Okay, I started as a reporter and editor at the Standard Examiner after I'd graduated from BYU in journalism, where I'd served as the city editor. And while I was in Ogden, I kept getting ideas to write a novel, but when you're an editor 8 hours a day, you kind of get burned out and don't want to go home and write. So I'd actually worked at the Springville Cemetery during college, and so the opportunity came for me to take over as the cemetery sexton there, and I took that job in 1995. And as I worked there, suddenly the ideas came more, and I had an idea come for an entire trilogy.
You had a little more dead time while you were there?
Exactly, yeah. It's amazing what you can think about when you're weed eating and digging graves. And I wrote what's called the Emma trilogy and came up with some characters. They're all based on family members. The stories set right there in Springville and Spanish Fork, and so that went really well. I actually got quite a bit of publicity and
positive response from readers.
Yes.
Who published that for you?
Cedar Fort.
Okay.
And
right
based
there
here in Springville.
Okay.
And I got to work with Lee Nelson. He's actually the one that signed the book and encouraged me a great deal. And Lee's writing style inspired me, and that's the way I write, is directly, not really flowery, just kind of tell a good story. I guess it's my newspaper background that is why I write the way I do. But at a certain point, Lee and the owner of the company, Lyle, asked if I would take over as their managing editor. And so I joined Cedar Fort, where I continued to write books. I moved into more of a nonfiction area for a while. I wrote the Tiny Talk series with my wife, Tammy, for primary children, and then the Aaronic Priesthood, Youth of Zion. And so that went really well. And then at one point, I felt I should write a book about my cemetery experiences called One Foot in the Grave. That went really well.
We've got a copy here, One Foot in the Grave. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when I was the cemetery sexton, I would keep a journal every day. And there were just a lot of curious experiences that would happen that once I retired from the cemetery, I compiled into this book. And it's actually the favorite book of a lot of people that read my books.
Can you tell us one story from the book?
Sure. One that definitely sticks in people's mind involves a man named Eddie. He was a kind of a homeless man in Springville. I won't give his last name because people might know him. He was buried right next to my office. And about 4 days after his burial, I think he stuck around because I started having locks picked here and there. We had a lock on our compound where we'd keep the backhoe, and I would check it every night. But once Eddie had passed away, and it started opening every night. And then another lock on a shed nearby, he had actually unlocked and hung about 2 feet above the door. And I knew it was Eddie. It just had to be. And I kind of told him, it's time to go to the light, Eddie. And he gave one last ditch effort, I guess. The next morning, I found the garbage can shoved in front of my door. The locks were all opened again. And finally, I just was quite stern with him and said, go to the light. It's time to move on. And for example, a lot of you might know my Uncle Lanny Daybell. He was the state brand inspector. Everybody in Spanish Fork knows him. Up at the cemetery, they say, you must be related to Lanny.
Cemetery. Now you're the Spanish Fork sexton.
That's right.
So you've gone from Springville to you've upgraded to Spanish Fork now.
To the promised land.
Okay, that's good. We like that. So you found yourself here in the promised land now. Mm-hmm. So how did you get from Spring Creek Books to Spanish Fork Sexton?
Okay. I am actually still the president of Spring Creek Books. But when the economy went in the tank in 2008, we had to drastically reduce our company to a part-time operation.
Oh, I see.
And
so Spring Creek Books still there. You published your volume 5 of Spring Creek Books.
And we still publish.
But you're not doing your distribution now?
Right. We've changed that to a distributor, Brigham Distributing, which has worked out very well for us. But so suddenly I needed a job to pay the benefits for the family and everything. And Hank Moore, who had been a great cemetery sexton here in Spanish Fork for 33 years, decided it was finally time to retire. And the timing was just right. I applied and was able to get the job. And so that's my full-time job, and we do Spring Creek Books on the side at night.
So do you have another?
Chad and Tammy had 5 children: Garth, Emma, Seth, Leah, and Mark. In 2015, Chad claimed he heard a voice telling him to relocate to Rexburg, Idaho. He and Tammy moved there from Springville, Utah. In a little description of one of Chad's books called Living on the Edge of Heaven, it says, an unusual connection to the spirit world. When Chad Daybell was 17 years old, He had a near-death experience while cliff jumping. He crossed into another dimension and realized there was a world beyond this one. A second near-death experience in his early 20s was much more in-depth. He was hit by a monstrous wave at the La Jolla Cove in California. While his body is being tossed by the wave, his spirit was visiting with his grandfather, who showed him the future events involving his still unborn children. This accident caused his veil that separates mortal life from the spirit world to stay partially open, so he often feels as if he has a foot in both worlds. Let's listen to Chad describe that experience at one of the Preparing a People conferences.
I talk to people who sometimes think, I'm just not measuring up. But if you've had this Holy Ghost experience testify to you, you're on the right path and you'll be led to the way you should go. I compare those of us that have visions to, sadly, kind of like to Laman and Lemuel. They had an angel appear to them, but it still didn't change their ways. They needed to have the testimony of the Holy Ghost to strengthen them and to know that Jesus is the Christ. But I did when I was 17. Teeth were a little straighter by now. I'll just briefly tell about my near-death experiences. I've told them enough that I don't need a whole lot of details. But for those who haven't heard, I went on a youth activity to Flaming Gorge, Utah, in northern Utah. And my friends loved to talk me into doing stupid things. I was the younger priest in the quorum, and they knew they could usually goad me into something that I shouldn't do. And they loved to cliff jump. We didn't dive, but this certain cliffs had several levels, and we slowly worked our way up, and finally we got to one that was about 60 feet high. This isn't not me, but this is about where we were at Flaming Gorge. I found this photo, and they told me to go first. And as I stood on the edge of that cliff, I was like, this is a terrible idea. But, that impressed my peers. So I took that jump, and it just took forever to hit the water. Just 1, 2, 3, I just kind of flailing. And when I hit, it was like hitting concrete. And it just felt like I broke my neck, honestly. That was my first indication. But what really happened is my body went deeper than my spirit. And so I was like 3/4 out of my body. It's like I came out through my head. And I looked around, and it was like a plane of white light, and just an amazing experience. I felt so peaceful and calm, and there were little particles of light that attached to my body, like they were just rushing at me. But within a few seconds, my body and spirit went back together. I later learned it wasn't the best fit. For 30 years, I was kind of off. So I went to a chiropractor, and he fixed me, and it felt a lot better since then. So, but a few years later, we went on a family vacation to La Jolla, California. This La Jolla Cove. And in the center of the picture there, you can kind of see some black rocks that go out. And my brother and I went out on the very tip of that at low tide. And as the tide started to shift, as we were looking for shells and things, a gigantic wave came and just plastered me. This is the same cove, a different angle, but that's about what that wave looked like. I was out on that tip, and then just looked up, and there was this wave right there. They just call it a rogue wave. It comes out of nowhere and smashed me, and I was sure I was going to die. And I was actually right. I did die. Suddenly, I got hit by the wave, but then I was just standing up found myself just upright. I was a spirit. I was in an orange room, and, well, not an orange room, but it was just an orange glow around me. And suddenly I saw my grandpa, Chad Daybell, who was my father's dad. He was in an army uniform, kind of a symbol of who he was. And he had with him his grandfather, Finity Daybell. And as Grandpa Keith talked to me, Finity was watching my body. It was floating around in the water, just kind of bouncing around, actually. And so I felt they knew they had a certain amount of time they could talk to me. And Grandpa Keith started telling me that in the future, I would write books based on my children's future. And he showed me like a panorama that just flipped through dozens of scenes, like a video wall, just showing me dozens of scenes of what happened to my children. And it was a great blessing. I soon returned to my body and kind of coasted to shore. My dad rushed to me and they took me to the hospital. I had to get some stitches and everything, but I bounced back. And a few years later, I started writing that series. And so that's how the Standing in Holy Places series began.
He is now going to go into what his new visions, his visions of these end of times, what's going to happen, this fear-based thing, that he knows. And this is when Lori and other people and the people going to these preparing people conferences became very interested. The LDS faith, the mainstream LDS, they prepare. Latter-day Saints, they are preparing for the latter days. They prepare. Part of their culture, part of their religion, part of their belief system is to have a year supply of food, etc. So groups like Chad's expand on this, and they promote this fear that if you don't have all of this, you aren't going to be chosen to pack up and move to where it is safe during the tribulations, the end of times, the book of Revelation. So they believe, and Chad believes, that he has been chosen as one of the 144,000 people that will get to go there. And there's certain criteria in order to become part of that group of people that are basically saved and can continue on. So back when I started my channel in late 2019, early 2020 on YouTube, Left Undone, Incomplete Investigations, I began following this case. And immediately, people that were following this case and knew, and LDS members approached me in ways of email and messages and all kinds of stuff. And it got really interesting. But some of it initially was so over my head, I had no idea what they were talking about. So in the past year, it all started to come together and make sense. And one of the emails that I had gotten back in March 1st, 2020, was from a woman that asked to remain anonymous. And she said, I don't know if you've seen this before, but there is a Facebook group called LDS Energy Healing Emotion Code Exposed. She said all these people believe the same thing with a little variation. They believe in the LDS Church, but they believe they are being given revelation to some higher law. This is why they are told to lie or do whatever you have to do to keep your temple recommend. All these people and this woman that wrote me this email were part of a prepper group, an LDS prepper group called AVOW. AVOW stands for Another Voice of Warning. Their whole forum was dedicated to preparing for the end of times, prepping. So to clarify, people are calling Chad and Lori's belief system a cult belief. And I believe it is. But there is some confusion that because they are LDS, that LDS is a cult. They have taken their beliefs, their LDS beliefs, and made their own little branch of beliefs. And much of what they believe goes against mainstream LDS doctrine. And that Facebook group, Emotion Code Exposed, goes into this and why they shouldn't believe this and what the actual stance by the LDS Church is on this energy healing and all this other stuff that's being talked about in these forums. The LDS Church's official policy on energy healing states, Church members are discouraged from seeking miraculous or supernatural healing from an individual or group that claims to have special methods for accessing healing power outside of prayer and properly performed priesthood blessings. These practices are often referred to as energy healing. Other names are also used, such as promises for healing are often given in exchange for money. They are saying still, despite these warnings and these statements from the church, energy healing is one of the fastest growing movements in Utah. We'll get into the energy healing thing and how it ties into all this right now. But I'm going to go back a little bit and start explaining to you how and why this is a cult. Now, what I've been told is there's many people involved in this, and it's more about an ideology than one single person that is the following. So it's about their idea, their ideology. And it is explained that it is a Hydra cult, which means there's many heads on this beast, on this ideology. And when one gets knocked off, two more pop up. So as people get kicked out or whatever, new people pop up and take their place. And so with the new people popping up and taking their place, new ideas come into play here. So things kind of change, or this new idea comes in and this person has this vision and now this is part of their ideology. One of the main ideologies of this group is something called the call out. And Chad does talk about that, and we'll listen to him talk about that a little bit in a minute. The group, the AVOW group, now stick with me here. The AVOW group was started by a man named Roger K. Young. And he started that forum. And now, modern day, up to date, when all this Chad stuff was going on, Christopher Parrott was the one that owned this group. It is a place where people could share their dreams and their visions and discuss all things call out and preparedness related. Believers of the call out believe that before the tribulation period in the book of Revelations happens, the end of times, the book of Revelations, the final book of the Bible, before this all happens, a righteous group of members will be asked to leave their home and leave everything behind. They will be asked to travel to special mountain camps set up by the LDS Church through the mountains of the Intermountain West. Now, the variations of how this will happen, most of them talk about happening during a special Sunday meeting at church, and only the people that meet that criteria will be given special instructions via a broadcast to all the churches, and this will come from the prophet. And they will be given the rest of the day to get their butts home, in my words, to go home, gather all their preparations, their year's worth of supplies, which will be picked up in the next day by big semi 18-wheeler trucks. And all of their stuff will be hauled to these camps. Then the members will get on special buses to take them to the camps. Now, Chad Daybell is a huge believer in the call out. And his books are specifically about the end of times, the call out, and the people that get to go to this place in the mountains, these white camps with these tents. These people are supposed to have a tent as well. The beliefs of the call out don't come from LDS doctrine. They come from visions that these special people have claimed to have. And let's listen for a minute, a little bit, tiny bit of Chad talking about when the call out, how he wrote in his book how the call out was going to happen. I'm going to edit and skip a little bit because he drags on some weird stuff in between once in a while, and he's super boring in my opinion. But I just want you to get the premise of what he was saying that falls right in line with all of this stuff.
The children, but it really is the story of what will occur to my children in a general sense, not every detail. But the main character is named Emma, and that's my daughter, my oldest daughter. And it's just, at the time when I wrote it, I'd worked at a publishing company and we'd done a couple of near-death books. And Deseret book had rejected them and just kind of had some controversy about them. And so I felt inspired that it should be written fictionally. and just not tell anybody that it's based on truth and just put it out there. And it sold really well.
You see how he says, I decided to write it fictionally and not tell people that it's a truth and just put it out there. Because of the LDS Church being sneaky, he put them out as fiction. But he clearly talks about them as if they are fact to him.
And it sold really well. And so we did a couple of follow-ups. The Great Gathering starts right as there's an earthquake in Utah, Salt Lake Valley. And you follow some of the families go to the camp. Some of them don't. And you see the outcome of that. And so they gather to the camps. The follow-up book talks about when they go to the final battle ends in World War III, and they go to build the Celestial City. This is actually a photo along the Missouri River. It looks like Switzerland or something, but by the end of the book, they actually get to Missouri. The third book talks about building up Zion and the great meeting at Adam-on-Diamond and various other things, such as the return of the 10 tribes. I felt I was shown a lot of that. I think one of my sons will be involved in that, so I was able to see how they are brought to New Jerusalem. The fourth book deals with Jerusalem itself quite a bit, with the two apostles that go to Jerusalem and help protect it, and then just other things that are occurring as Zion grows in America. And the fifth book talks about the second coming and the renewed earth. And that had a lot of interesting insights as I wrote those books. That's where I received a lot of my visions, if you want to call it, as I'm actually typing. It's like they're downloading the scenes into my head. And so people ask me, how much is true? I always say you ought to do a version where you just yellow highlight the parts that are actually true, and then just but it would be hard to do because even within the same paragraph, there's a lot of truth. And as I progressed, it seemed like the visions increased. And so by the time I got to Renewed Earth, I felt pretty confident that at least the general major scenes that I was describing are going to occur. And I hope that series testifies of Christ and that
And then just some more random clips of him talking about the call out, the end of times. He's describing it perfectly of what their whole belief system, what they've talked about. It's all in his books. So just a couple more of his boring talk, and then we'll get back to discussion.
The Hoover Dam was cracked in an earthquake. There's some volcanic activity. Las Vegas is suddenly out of water, and hydroelectric plants aren't working the way they should, and people are panicking. They're starting to starve and be very thirsty, and they do what you'd expect them to do. They just get in their cars and drive. And out of Las Vegas, there's not too many places they can go. They're not going to go back to California where all the earthquakes are. They are going to start coming this direction. That route through the Virgin River Gorge is going to be destroyed. You look at some of the bridges, and that's not going to hold up under a 7.0 earthquake. Some people will try to make it through the Virgin River Gorge, and it just isn't going to happen. They might make it downtown, most likely George, but it won't be like we have the yellow shirted helping hands just standing there waiting for them on this occasion. What's going to happen right before that, under the direction of the church, and probably even, I just feel that many of you in this room are going to take part in this. Springdale, right there along that ridge, are going to be places of refuge where the saints will go ahead of time. Another key place will be Pine Valley, that region. There's an old, it's an old pioneer church that they still use there. And that will become sort of a headquarters where the leaders of this area will congregate and organize. There's a lot of good campgrounds up there. But back to this picture. So downtown St. George is where these refugees are going to come. And I was amazed as I drove in just how much has been built in the last 5 years. Because, in 2014, 2015, we were like, it's coming, we're going to have an earthquake, everything's going to fall into place. But I can see how the slight delay, if you want to call it that, has allowed great growth here that will actually house refugees, and that it is part of the Lord's plan that this area is developed and be able to accommodate these people. They might not have electricity or a lot of food, but they'll be able to have shelter.
And this is what he does. Oh, I haven't been here for so long, and I see now the reason of the delay. It's actually better because now there's more places for these refugees to be able to take shelter, because his predictions didn't come true when he initially said they would. And so he's like, oh, I get it. Yeah, there was a delay because this place needed to be better for all these people that were going to show up here. Just what like Julie Rowe does. Their prediction doesn't come true and they throw in a wrench and they're like, oh, yeah, because this happened or that happened. They always have an excuse for why their prediction didn't come true. Oh, there was a change of plans. God had this little tweak in it.
And be safe. Because I feel that the majority of people that actually make it this far from California and Nevada are good-hearted people that have their purpose in life is to join the church and to make it. I wanted to talk about my fourth book. This is the last book in this series. When I first started the Times of Turmoil series, I thought it would just go on endlessly. Didn't really have an end point. But as I was writing it, at the end of this book, World War III ends, and the Spirit told me, this is the end of the time of times of turmoil. And so that is why the series ends there. And then it kind of picks up and things improve as we build New Jerusalem. This book was strange because I finished the third book, Days of Fury, 3 years ago. And I had this cover ready 2 years ago. But the Spirit just kept telling me, you need to hold off. It's not time to tell this story yet. And so I just held off. I was told there would be a shaking before I released this book. And me being dumb thought, well, that must mean the first earthquake. So I'll just wait until the first earthquake. I even put that on my website.
And then he talks about why Rexburg. So let's listen to that, because why did he move to Rexburg? And remember, when the Jameses introduced him, they said that he's the reason they moved to Rexburg. The Preparing of people that run the Preparing of People, the Jameses, remember when they introduced him? I can play that right here. They said that he is
Welcome, everybody, to Preparing a People Conference announcement with Chad Daybell, one of our main speakers. We are holding the first Rexburg conference in the Tabernacle up there on Saturday, July the 15th. And our theme is uplifting the downtrodden and healing the brokenhearted, which we all can relate to, right?
I'm just very honored to be part of the conference. I've recently released my autobiography entitled Living on the Edge of Heaven, where I tell more about my 2 near-death experiences and how that prompted me to write my novels. And I will also at the conference talk a little bit more about my upcoming novel, where I talk more about some of the refugees that I've seen coming from the West Coast after there's destruction and troubles there, and how we will be able to assist them and help them not only physically but also spiritually, and help them in their lives, and I'm eager to share that with you.
So we are really excited to have Chad. Chad's one of my favorite people. In fact, he used to be in Springville, and then we followed him to Rexburg. Yeah, but seriously, after this, you can click on.
And here's where Rexburg comes into play. And so many of these people actually moved to Rexburg because of these beliefs.
Rexburg, little Rexburg will become the headquarters of the church temporarily as the war ends and we begin to move to New Jerusalem. So we won't be packing up our wagons from Salt Lake. We'll just Rexburg will be the center. And I actually, in my book Celestial City, I guess I wrote that. I did not realize that until I started this series. I went back and looked, and there it says Rexburg is the headquarters of the church. So it amazes me how sometimes the books even parallel each other.
So that's all his stuff about the call out and where and what's going to happen. He puts it all in his book 1, 2, and 3. He sits there in this seminar and says he's seen it. These are his visions. But then he throws in, but it's fiction, when he's truly telling people and clearly trying to not get his butt in trouble with the LDS church that this is fiction. But then he flat out says, I'm tempted to go look for this cabin. I know these people. These people are coming. Their husband, So he's telling you that these are his visions, but he's telling you he labeled the book fiction. Sneaky, sneaky, Chad. There was a woman who really contributed to this ideology and these thoughts. Her name was Sarah Minute, and she claimed she had a near-death experience during a failed suicide attempt. And Roger K. Young, the original owner of AVOW, promoted her book. He promoted it very heavily on AVOW. So because of the nature of the call-out ideology, AVOW became a forum mostly dedicated to preparedness and the study of eschatology, along with a heavy reliance upon the dreams and visions of the members in the forum that they would share. The dictionary says, eschatology, the part of theology concerned with death, judgment, and the final destiny of the soul and of humankind. A belief concerning death, the end of the world, or the ultimate destiny of humankind specifically. Any of various Christian doctrines concerning the second coming, the resurrection of the dead, or the last judgment. So, as you can see, the members of these groups were very invested in being the ones that got to be part of the end of times, that got to be during the call out, that would be able to go. There's a lot of fear-based going on here. But for whatever reason, these people think they're very special and above regular people. So then there were other forums that kind of did the same thing, and the call out was a big thing in all these other forums as well. In 2006, a man named Denver Snuffer wrote a book called The Second Comforter. In it, he claimed to have a one-on-one visitation with Christ. And because of this, he became very popular and he gained his calling and election. He then began teaching his formula to others so they could get to this as well. And his work became so popular in the prepper forums, as time went on, he became more and more hostile to the LDS church. And in 2013, Denver Snuffer was excommunicated. So during that whole time when all brouhaha was going on about Denver Snuffer and his beliefs and all this, another book rose in this group of people in popularity, and it was called Visions of Glory. And Visions of Glory came out in 2012 and are the visions and near-death experiences of a man called Spencer. His real name is Thomas Harrison. The visions mostly surrounded the end of the world and Spencer's special role in it. One of the Hydra heads of these groups. They all claim some special role or special mission. Now, that book was written by a man named John Pointis, who was an author. Visions of Glory is really loved in most of the groups, even though there are some big doctrinal errors. Because of the errors, once the author actually died, the person who it was about, Spencer, he blamed the author, Pointis, for all the errors. Because he was gone. He couldn't defend himself anymore. So here's a commercial for Visions of Glory.
Are you looking for Visions of Glory? Confetti Antiques and Books has Visions of Glory by John Pontius. Hard to find. In fact, it's been sold out 3 times since its debut in November 2012. Regular price $17.99. Buy 10 or more and pick them up for $11.50. That's a 36% savings. Visions of Glory recounts the amazing near-death experiences and subsequent visions of Spencer as told to author John Pontius. Pick up your copy today. Sold exclusively at Confetti Antiques and Books.
Now, while all this was going on, there was a woman in the AVOW group, and she went by the name of Vallow Dreamer, and she started posting her visions on AVOW. And she would corroborate things like the call out and things in Visions of Glory and say she too had these same visions. She would also rip things out of the headlines and claim that she saw them as well. So Vallow Dreamer, Chad was very intrigued by Vallow Dreamer. And he got in contact with her, and together they wrote her near-death experience. Vallow Dreamer is a woman by the name of Julie Rowe. Her first near-death experience is called A Greater Tomorrow. Her book got very popular, and not just among the AVOW people, but it spread all over LDS Facebook groups, and tons of people really, really enjoyed this book and were intrigued by it immensely. People were given copies of her books. When they went visiting family members, they would give them books. One woman wrote to me and she told me when she got this book, she was just like enamored. She couldn't put it down. It was that interesting to her and that important to her. I'll have to dig up that email where she explains that. This is already going to be long enough, so we won't go into that one right now. And the woman that wrote me where I got this information says, she said, I was a member of a lot of groups and a lot of this stuff. And she said, I had never seen anything like it. And Julie Rowe was into this energy healing that we were talking about a little bit ago. So Julie was a student of a man by the name of Bradley Nelson, and he is an emotion code practitioner. So many women from those groups, they got into the energy healing. They were just fascinated by it. And Julie Rowe said God told her it was good, that this is something good and is something they should be doing. According to when Julie Rowe had her near-death experiences, she said, God told me it was all cool. You know, this energy healing is okay. It's allowed. And she also told people that God told her it was a special healing gift. People that could do this healing through this energy healing would help the people when they were in these call-out mountain camps. Because remember, there's not going to be any hospitals or anything. So these women were getting all prepped up to know how to do this energy healing so they could help people when they became sick or whatever in these camps. But when all that was going on, Julie Rowe eventually got excommunicated because it was against LDS doctrine and they weren't having it. They were like, bye, Julie, you are excommunicated. Julie is also a huge proponent of something called multiple mortal probations, which we talked about briefly before. But basically, it's a version of reincarnation. Remember, Chad's been on this planet 33 times and Lori 20-something times. And a lot of people see in the preparing people following that group that follows the conferences and everything really seem to be a believer of the multiple mortal probations, even though it is against their true church doctrine. There was another guy that Chad published. His name was Hector Sosa, and Chad published his visions as well. So there's a lot of heads in this Hydra, right? There's a man named Sean Little Bear who claims to be the one who can bring the Book of Lehi from his native tribe to the church, as well as bring the Ark of the Covenant from its hiding place to the new temple of Jerusalem, thanks to a special bloodline and callings. So apparently there's some lost plates somewhere that are part of the Book of Mormon, and Sean Little Bear believes he has access or he's found them. And then there's a man by the name of Mike Stroud. Mike Stroud was excommunicated as well. He's a retired seminary teacher who is also a believer of these Denver Snuffer doctrines, how to gain your calling and election, and says that he has been personally taught by Christ himself. And that when this happens, he claims you become a translated being, which, remember, Lori thought she was becoming translated, and Melanie said she was so hot. My personal view on that was her heat was her menopause kicking in. But you become a translated being. And because of that, you are one of the 144,000, again, spoken of in the book of Revelation. He also teaches that men need to use their priesthood more fully so they can open portals. Here's the portals for travel and command the elements. There's your Zalema. There's your elements. I can cause rain. I can cause this. I can cause that, right? So see where it's all tying in. The Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell beliefs tie into all these other people and what they've said and what they've learned at these conferences and these books and these readings and these forums. And then this Mike Stroud also teaches that all sickness, physical or mental issues, is because you are possessed. And in my opinion, that's where this zombiness comes in. So if people are acting crazy or people are weird or people are sick, they're being possessed. Think about Zalema with her emails to Chad. Like, I think I've got this headache or I've got this problem. Oh my God, this person is this, am I possessed? I need to cast out. All of that goes right back to this crap. Because of all this possession and stuff, he was teaching people to give what he called quorum blessings. And the quorum blessings is a group of 4 men who are fully using their priesthood and aware, and they will cast the demons out and then pronounce healing among people. Makes sense now, right? Stroud also is a believer in that book, Visions of Glory. And Stroud started a podcast where he taught his interpretation of the Book of Mormon from the stance of Snuffer and Spencer beliefs. He also teaches that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a telestial church, and that when you get your calling and election via his methods, then you're entering a terrestrial church, which is the church of the firstborn. It's not an actual church among these groups, but more of a title and a status symbol. Now, looking at Stroud's teaching, they are very much in line, like I'm telling you, with what Lori Vallow was believing. And there's a lot of other people in these circles, but that is a good background on where this all came from, why this belief system is even there, and where it all came from. Multiple probations and translated being and demons and casting out. The woman that gave me this information says, well, there you go. Do you understand now? This gives you an idea about the many heads within these circles, this Hydra Cult. So during all this, preparing a people evolved, became a thing. There were already conferences going on in the LDS prepper crowd. One was put on by the Firm Foundation, which was headed by a man named Rod Meldrum, another wannabe church scholar who was known for something called the Heartland Theory. And his theory basically believes that the geography from the Book of Mormon was not from South America, but from North America. But he also became really fixated and allowed himself to become affiliated with all the crazy groups and then took on some of their ideology. Allegedly, his wife was also one of these emotion code practitioners. So the conferences with Rod Meldrum, they became really popular. So then that's when Mike and Nancy James set up Color My Media. That was their company. And they began organizing the conferences where all these people, Sean Littlebear, Hector Sosa, Chad Daybell, all these people came and taught at. Then they all have podcasts where they talk about their beliefs and their experiences and all this stuff as well. And they had seminars and they had special videos that you could buy. And they were all extremely close to Chad Daybell. And by that time, Chad was full swing talking about his own near-death experiences and visions. And eventually Lori Vallow was doing podcasts for them.
All right, it is November 26, 2018. And we are very first podcast. My name is Jason Mao, and to my left is...
I'm Melanie Gibb.
Melanie is awesome. For those of you that don't know who she is, she has some amazing abilities, amazing gifts. She is what we in the business call a gatherer. And people are naturally attracted to her because of just the light that beams out of her. The first time I saw her, I knew instantly that she was a gatherer. And she's become basically the point person here in the Southwest area for like-minded people to start focusing on greater light and knowledge and learning a lot about themselves and about the Lord and what it is that he wants from us. And so I am honored to have her to my left.
Thank you.
Also with us today is
Lori.
And Lori is so cool. Lori and I met in a very, very unique situation. And real quick, Lori, let's talk about that before we start, because people don't even know who you are. Well, people in the know who you are, but one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast is so that we can spread the light of knowledge and help people learn about who they are and find their gifts and draw closer to Christ. And what happened to you was pretty unique, and how we ended up in the same room together is even more unique. So can we start off with that?
We can. It's so fun to be here with Jason and Melanie. I love them so much and grateful for them and all their service that they do. I feel like that I work for the Lord. I feel like I've turned my life to him from circumstances that have happened to me in my life. And I ask him who he wants me to meet, who he needs me to go to, and what he wants me to do. And I was sent to the temple on a certain day to get a message from someone. And in walked Jason Mao.
And when I looked at you, when I looked into your eyes for the first time and really saw who you were inside, I instantly knew you're one of us. You're a gatherer. You get it. You understand that there's something bigger going on here than just church on Sunday, that this is the end times, and you are awake, you are prepared, you are moving in that direction. And I saw that in just a half a second of that brother and sister connection that we made. And I just knew right away I had to get you in touch with Melanie, and we needed to connect somehow. And so that's how one thing led to another. And then Melanie, you got the idea to start doing a podcast so that we could kind of just spread the good word.
Yeah. So once, and I've known Jason for a while now, and meeting Lori, I knew that there was a message that we needed to share. And one of the things that we all have in common is we have all been changed by Jesus Christ. And we've all woken up. We've gone through some incredible trials. And so I knew that there's many people that are becoming aware that either they want to be more awakened or they already are beginning to be. And so they wanted to learn more about some of the things that we've gone through, some of the trials that we've gone through, to help us have that mighty change of heart. And I've been wanting to do this for a very long time. About 10 years ago, I had my experience with the mighty change of heart and have started to write a book about that.
Then it was explained to me that among the people of AVOW and other Facebook groups like Daybell and Rowe are referred to as prophets, but prophets with a small p, while President Nelson is a capital P, prophet. President Nelson is actually the president of the LDS Church. So he's a big P, but these guys are little P's in their minds, or however they decided to do it. So people in the followers look at them as visionary and prophets, but not the same way that they would, President Nelson or the big prophets of the church. So that's how the Hydra Cult basically operates. They have multiple little prophets. So when they lose one, there's others in their place and others waiting in the wings to join. And they also believe that the original little P's, these Hydra Cult leaders, started out legit, like Julie Rowe, Denver Snuffer, Mike Stroud, but they became deceived later on. And that thought right there gives you a big reason why people still believe this. Because odds are, when you're thinking about that, that's what they believe about Chad now. They probably believe that Chad got deceived. And, you know, he was legit. He really had these visions, and then he got all screwed up and deceived. And look what happened to him now. So now we got to listen to these other new people that pop up because they're not deceived like Chad was, like Julie Rowe once was, is now, you know, moving on. So that's why they still hold on to these initial teachings because, oh my gosh, they were all on it and then they got deceived. They got all screwed up. But we still believe all that because when they were teaching these things, they were legit believers. They were good. So the people just continue to believe this stuff. Once in a while, people in the groups will let it split that there's something strange going on in the inner circles of the Hydra head people. There's multiple cults of personality going on simultaneously, but getting solid information is extremely hard. How do people get sucked into all this? Friends and family members bring them in. Emotionalism, fear, especially the last days fear is used, but also pride is huge. Members are being told that they can be saved from doomsday, destruction, but it goes into the next life salvation. So that's why it's so huge and important. And then when they looked, people that have given me information have read, said reading the PAP course, the Preparing to People course on how to have visions and visionary dreams, they will use people such as Korihor, a Book of Mormon Antichrist, to compare those who don't believe in their dreams. So there's a lot of peer pressure into believing this, like you're a Korihor if you don't believe it. They'll use a lot of out of context scripture and church leader quotes, and then they'll redefine words like meditation. They use quotes talking about how great meditation is, but then define it as the same thing as Eastern medicine, which it is not. They'll name drop a lot. A lot of them will name drop, and that's why they'll say, like Nancy James had sense. She was the wife and the couple that started Preparing People, the conferences, and she sent someone a message. When they spoke against Sean Little Bear. Nancy brings up a position her mother had in order to further agenda. She brings up how her grandfather knew President Benson. She brings up general authorities' name to add credibility. No proof, just name dropping. She then brings up how his nephew is a bishop, call dropping. So many of these things are brought by members because they are too trusting of anyone claiming to be a member of the church, or because someone told them that someone involved was a bishop or someone knew a general authority. People claim energy healing is good because this prophet or that prophet does it with no real proof. And even if Nancy James' grandfather knew President Benson, does that excuse the false doctrine she is disseminating? No. Then there was some more information sent to me why everyone wanted to move to Rexburg, that this was circling on AVOW. Christopher Parrott had told everyone years ago that Rexburg was supposed to be a safe place when all the tribulations spoken of and as Isaiah start taking place. They knew this because of dreams and visions of a lot of people. There's a huge cult. Then it goes back to talking about this church of the firstborn. Julie Rowe went there to teach her energy healing and give seminars about what's coming. One time she offered one of Chad's neighbors money to buy their house. They told her they were not in the market to sell. Some YouTubers went to Rexburg and they spoke to neighbors of Chad. And they said that Christopher had secret meetings at his house once a week. Everyone keeps quiet because they don't want to lose their membership in the LDS church. They believe the LDS church teachings, but believe they have been given more and are baptized into this new church of the firstborn. They believe this is the next step. And they practiced energy healing and have visits from the other dark side. Julie does talk a lot about being attacked by the dark side, but it is assumed they're all studying the things laid out, like all of this stuff we've been going over. In one of Julie Rowe's videos, she said there are several different groups, Church of the Firstborn, throughout the country. Julie lives in Missouri and has a huge following there. And there's a group in Arizona, Utah, and Idaho that people that have emailed me had found out about since investigating this case. And they all have different leaders. These groups all have different purposes. And the purpose of the group that Chad was the head of is to control the weather and elements and something to do with music. This is why Zulema is in their group. She supposedly has some control of the weather and elements, which we dug up and dug into that when Chad and her were having these text messages. I hope it's somewhat clear. I am telling you, it took me so long to figure out how to tie any of this stuff together. But it is very clear that, the people that have emailed me and helped me understand this, that are involved in the LDS Church and the faith and have been in these forums, they have been able to point out that, look at, this is what was going on. And this is what was happening before it ever became a thing, before Charles was shot, before people were missing, before all this bad, horrible stuff with the Daybells went down. This is where this is the root, I suppose, is what I want to say, of all of this stuff. And we will keep going. We will definitely keep going because more and more I have so much information. And hopefully I'm tying it together in a good chronological way for you all to get. Because like I said, when things were getting thrown at me way back in like March of 2020, kids were missing. We didn't know anything about that at that point. And we will get to that, but I'm trying to get that in the right order. I had no idea what they were talking about. Hydra Cult and Cult. Blah, blah. I put this email aside. I said, I don't even understand why AVOW has to be involved in any of this. So now it became more and more clear how involved the people that were following, what their belief system was, why they all thought they wanted to be this special person, why Lori was, whoa, I am the queen of the 144,000, how this all came to be, and how serious some of these people were taking this. That's why Charles is dead, because of this Idaho cult belief system. Come to Rexburg. Rexburg's the place, the Idaho cult. And that is why I named this podcast Afterglow, Unveiling of the Idaho Cult. Afterglow. There will be justice. These nasty, horrible people with their terrible belief system, there will be justice. Unfortunately, people had to die because of them, but in the end, they've been exposed. And why did I name this podcast Afterglow, Unveiling of the Idaho Cult? You've clearly understood the part about unveiling the Idaho Cult. The definition of afterglow that I am using for this podcast is a glow remaining where a light has disappeared. Charles's glow, the children's glow, Tammy's glow, it remains. That's why we're all invested in this case, for justice for them to leave their afterglow. So a light that is left in the sky after the sun has set. Their days on earth have set, but their glow remains. And we will get justice for those that were murdered based on the belief of this Idaho cult that we will continue to unveil. Thank you for listening to Afterglow, Unveiling of the Idaho Cult. I'm Kathy Brooks. There are links in the show notes if you would like to donate to help support the show. Nothing's too small to help my show continue. I really appreciate you all. Stay safe, stay well, and I will be back next week. I'm Kathy Brooks. Thank you for listening to Afterglow, Unveiling the Idaho Cult. Written, produced, recorded, and narrated, and edited by me, Kathy Brooks. Theme music by Dan Lebowitz.